friends and gamers. So here we have again Wintermute for our fourth talk, I think it is, or third talk, I suppose, with Wintermute. So this topic of today will be the expansions for Global War 36, our top expansions for 36, which will go over our top ones as well as our honorable mentions. So I'm going to surrender the floor to you first, and you can talk about what you think is best.
Well, first I want to talk about one of those things that kind of irritates me in modern board gaming real quick. And that is sometimes you get really hyped about a game and it comes out and you buy it and you're like, okay, it's good and I'm happy and I want people to play it. And then you find out like a few months later, oh, well, here's this expansion. And you buy that expansion because you want more people, because you think it's going to be a good expansion. You play it and you're like, wait a minute. You took the core game that you had originally designed and you split it into two freaking games. The core game and the expansion.
Right.
I hate that.
Oh, yeah.
I hate that so much. And I'm not saying every game that has a lineup of expansions planned ahead of time is doing that. But I've played enough games and I've heard enough people talk about games that big games in the market where it's like, okay, this game is good, it's just missing, but you really need that very first expansion that comes out, man. That just gives you the whole thing, gives you the whole package. It's like, yeah, that's all the stuff that they cut out that should have been in the base game. A lot of the time. Now there are sometimes there's legitimate reasons why that has to happen, but but I know it happens with some gaming companies because it's a marketing scheme.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you know that's happening, and it's you got to take it on a case by case basis. Now, is Global War one of those games? No, absolutely not.
I agree.
You buy the core game, you're getting a complete game that feels like a complete game.
That's right. Yeah.
Now you can look at it and go, I think the game needs to go a little more in-depth into combat, or I need it to go a little more in-depth into this historical event, or I need it to go a little more in-depth into various unit types that are available. Great. That's what expansion should be for, where you dig a little bit deeper into the surface behind, especially when you talk about a historical game. And just for example, I think the best example is the Spanish Civil War. The core game gives you a complete version of the Spanish Civil War to play out within the game.
That's right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have I have nothing negative to say about that. But if you wanted to spice it up, you can go buy the Spanish Civil War expansion.
That's right.
You can take it to another deeper level or higher level, depending on how you imagine it. But in the end, you then, and maybe that's the only expansion you want because you just felt the game needed, because it is such a historically complex event that you just felt that there needed to be more to it, and more options in the game, and so you buy that expansion, and now you're happy with the way the game plays.
Right. Yeah.
And so in that sense, Global War is fantastic.
Yeah,
really
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And one way to illustrate it for our viewers too, one way that could be described is if Global War 36, if HBG came out with 36, and what they did with the Spanish Civil War is saying automatically the nationalists win. Once 39 starts, the nationalists are in control, and that they leave it at that, and don't. It all happens behind the curtain, and then they say, buy this expansion to see what happens behind the curtain. It's like, well, that could be packed all in together. So yeah, that would be a good example of what it is like. And I like what you have to say, that the expansions add flavor. I heard this Napoleonic Wargaming channel I like to listen to. So he describes the core base of the game is like rice pudding. He's British, right? So rice pudding. And then the expansions are the toppings. The expansions are the topping you put on there, on your pancake or whatever it is. Jam or cinnamon, sugar or maple syrup, right? So all these different ones are the expansions that are flavored to the taste of the individual player or players that play the game. So I think that's a good analogy that seems to work quite well. So for instance, Canadians might want the little bit of maple syrup expansion with the Canada expansion, right? Whereas other people might want more of a America-focused type of expansion system set up.
Yep. So we'll start out with you. What is your favorite expansion? I think we all know where this is going, but go ahead.
Well, I'll try to be unbiased, but before I get into expansions, I think it's worthwhile categorize expansions into several different things. So there's expansions that impact everything on a unit level. Like you get a basket of units for Germany or a basket of units for America, and those are the expansions, and they usually don't impact more than one nation. There's some that do. Sometimes, like the China at War expansion impacts the communists, Chinese, and maybe even the Russians. I can't remember if they get a special area unit or not.
It impacts Germany. It
In Germany,
impacts
okay.
Japan.
Okay.
It impacts Russia. It
Yeah.
in a roundabout way impacts almost every nation. The only one maybe that's maybe an exception in a direct sense is Italy.
So there we have it.
Maybe.
So there we have, that's a different type of expansion. So you have the basket of unit type expansions. So Battle over the Atlantic adds stuff for Germany and adds stuff for the Allies. The China at War expansion is something else. It's more, what would you call it? More of a grand expansion?
It's more of a historical zoom in.
A historical zoom in. Sure.
There's probably
sure.
a better term for that.
Yeah.
It zooms in a little more, gives you a little more detail
That's
about
right.
what's happening, talks about specific events and why
That's
they
right.
happened, and here's some options that you have as a player regarding those events, that sort of thing.
So it's similar to the Spanish Civil War because it impacts everybody. So I don't know if you call it historical or a grand strategic perspective of things. I don't really know what the terminology is. So now we have two different categories. We have like the basket of units. We have like I'm calling it grand strategical expansion. And then you also have stuff that add kind of event baskets, right? Or whatever you want to call it, where it's like the German operational plan, where it is not so much units. I mean, there might be some units peppered in there, but in general, it's just events and such that unpack it. So another one would be East versus West, a bunch of different events that get thrown into the mix as well. So yeah, those are the three categories I'd throw in.
I would throw in a fourth category, and I would put East versus West in that fourth category.
Okay.
Where I think the game itself changes so dramatically. It's almost a different game.
Right, that's fair. That's fair.
And I think Zombies is a good example of that.
Yeah.
I think East versus West is a good example of that. And I really want to play East versus West, but at that point, I'm not in my mind. And I know there's different scenarios within the rules. I haven't read them in depth.
Yeah.
So I'm talking in generalities, but in my mind, I know I'm really playing East versus West. I'm using the core mechanics of Global War and its map and its pieces and all that, but I'm really playing East versus West. And that's how I also feel about the zombie expansion. You're really playing the zombie expansion because it's so dramatically, and I know that one also has some levels of play, but it's still so dramatically can change the game that you're really playing that game. And that's not a criticism. That's perfectly reasonable. That's perfectly reasonable to have that in any sort of board game. And there are other examples of board games that have done this.
So perhaps the categories would be basket of units, then it'd be historical zoom in, then it'd be alternate game in the sense of like East versus West, Latin America at war where you have stuff happening there that didn't otherwise have happened, zombies or Atlantis.
I put that one in historical.
Historical,
All
Latin
of
America?
that stuff is historically possible.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But so is East versus West, though.
Right. But here's the thing. And I know we're getting a little nitpicky. But Latin America does not change the entire rest of the game.
Okay, fair enough.
As East versus West does.
Yeah, that's fair.
Does that make sense? And that's the distinction I make when I think about them. And maybe somebody could criticize that or not. But that's how I look at it in my head. Zombies and East versus West is a different game. Latin America is a historical zoom in. Or we'll just call them historical expansion. Sure. That kind of zooms in on possible events that could have taken place, and it takes things little known events that were happening that could have had greater impact had things gone a little differently. And so so that's in my mind. That's why I put those two in different categories like that.
So we could sloppily put things into 3 or 4 baskets. It's not tidy, it's not clean, and sometimes they overlap. But in most part, you throw it into that hamper, the laundry hamper of this one. The issue with like a historical one is like everything on some level is a little bit historical, so that's kind of why I avoid that name. So China at War is historical, but so is Minorities of America, even though I'd classify that one as a basket of units type expansion. So yeah, it's a little bit, you get where I'm coming from, I think. Okay, let's go down to our top expansions that we enjoy in this game. So my top one, I'm a Canadian, but I'm going to be unbiased as possible. Spanish Civil War is my top one. Because the Spanish Civil War appeals to me, and it appeals broadly to a lot of the players as well. It does the kind of, call it grand strategy or the historical aspect where it involves multiple parties into this conflict. It's not just like a basket of units that affects America or Japan. It's simply about the Spanish Civil War, and everybody can partake in that pie, apart from Japan, but Japan's got its own stuff going on, and a few other nations as well, but you get the picture. I like that one quite a bit. So there's everybody can intervene on several different levels as well. So you have choices as well. Do you want to go full intervention, partial intervention? Do you care about intervening at all? And it adds, some interesting units and events as well. So it's just a very well-rounded expansion that does a lot and adds a lot of flavor, especially in that pre-war stage of the game, right? So it's very enjoyable because something people can dive in, involve themselves, and kind of throw the training wheels on the Spanish Civil War and learn a little bit about the game before they go on to the grand strategy of things. So that's why I really enjoy the Spanish Civil War. It makes it it adds another dynamic behind the game that makes it much more interesting for just the vanilla Spanish Civil War.
And we can jump right into mine because I would put the Spanish Civil War as number one as well.
Okay.
For all the same reasons that you said, but moreover, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's more involved.
That's true. Yeah.
It's now I haven't played with a group because I really haven't played many expansions with other players. A lot of us a lot of them are we just want to play the vanilla. We want to keep playing the vanilla until we feel that we're confident before we adding in all these other variables, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I've solo played the Spanish Civil War. When the Spanish Civil War was the very first expansion I bought. And I always, every time I played it through, I always said, this is a really great addition to the game.
It is.
I always want to play with it. And I think that's an example of a really good expansion.
Oh, I know, right?
Everybody at the table says Spanish Civil War. Oh, yeah, absolutely Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's like a given.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think that may be the closest one to ever a given that would probably be out there from what feedback I get from other players. Canada at War being probably a very close second.
That's cool to hear.
And I'm serious because it feels right. It makes sense. It merges with the game in a way that is not. It doesn't dramatically change the rules. It treats Canada like a separate nation of the Commonwealth, which makes sense, makes perfect sense. So yeah, that's for all those reasons, and then the ones I mentioned are why I like the Spanish Civil War.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, no, I really like that, and I think once people play a little bit more, I feel it doesn't add too much time into the game, but it adds a lot of enjoyment into the game as well. So I think it's an easy in for me.
I do want to make one more point about the Spanish Civil War before we move on. I do have the Admiral edition.
Oh, I haven't played with that one.
War. I have read it. It is very heavy. Okay. So I'm still trying to. I need to sit down one day and I need to kind of set it up and run through it a little bit quick. It's definitely a lot less. I think on the surface level, it's a lot less intuitive. But for somebody who really wants to savor every moment of that Spanish Civil War, then it looks really good. I'm beyond. So I want to clarify. It looks good, but I haven't tried that yet. And for the most part, right now, I'm just talking about the basic, not the Admiral version. I'll probably do my own video on the Admiral version at some point once I've had the time to kind of play with it a little.
Right. So should we point out any issues that we see or things that we would like to improve on the Spanish Civil War? I have one thing I could mention, and that is the events. You know how you roll a dice for the events? Now, I really like that mechanic behind it. And sorry I didn't talk about the Admiral edition. I know nothing about it, so I have nothing to contribute. So with the events, I like the fact that you roll a dice for it, and I like the fact that certain interesting things happen there, but it's a little bit of a sad occasion because you only get 6 dice rolls before war breaks out, 7 dice rolls before war breaks out, and if you happen to hit the same number multiple times, I think it just acts as a non-event. So I think it would be, the only tweak I would have is that you'd say 12 is the most impactful on the world level, like say in severity, like something dynamic and very interesting happens, and 1, nothing much happens. And so every time you miss a dice roll, or you could even do it every turn that goes by, you add 1 to the dice. So it starts to become heavy towards the top end of the dice, meaning that you'll get some of those more interesting events happening at the top. Just a thought and a suggestion. Apart from that, I have no opposition towards it whatsoever. I think it's a very fun game.
I know some people have said, and this, I actually just recently realized this, and I went back and reread the rules, but I was talking with somebody else and he mentioned, there's a problem with the Spanish Civil War, the way the wording is about alignment with once Germany goes to war with Russia. Right. And that there's an exploit where Germany basically chooses not to wipe out that's right, nationalists, and then they just walk right into Gibraltar from Spain. Because Spain is now aligned with Germany. Yeah. And I go, because if you read the base rules, it doesn't really work that way. The expansion changes it. Yeah, I'm like, I see. Okay, I never really realized that. I see. But I think I do say this. Some of the older expansions I think need a revamp.
Right, exactly.
Not just to change the wording to match version 3.
Yeah.
They need kind of to be kind of rethought from
That's
the ground
right.
up.
That's right. Yeah,
Things
yeah.
added, things taken away.
Yeah.
Just and also from feedback from experience of players.
For
and
sure.
this may be this I think is an example of one where players
Yeah,
said, "Hey,
yeah.
this is a problem."
Yeah.
Now I think it's easily fixable with one simple house rules.
Yeah.
Until the Spanish Civil War is resolved, Germany cannot do the
That's right. Spanish
Spain itself cannot attack outside of Spain.
Yeah.
It still maintains its integrity.
I
would
agree.
also argue that I think overall, from a historical standpoint, I don't think those sides should align with Germany and Russia respectively. When Germany and Russia goes to war, historically, I don't think that would have happened. Speaking historically, that this is a long discussion that I will say.
I'm sure.
But I will make the argument somewhere else. I don't think they should do that. I don't think that should even happen in the base game. But that's a relatively minor nitpick on my part. That I don't even I will be more than happy to explain it and my position on it. But that I'm not like bemoaning it.
Yeah, but Russia needs to have an incentive to win, and so does Germany as well. So that is the incentive for them to join. So, okay, let's go on to your second best. Since I led with the first, let's go with your second.
Mine would be China at War.
Okay.
Now again, I have not had a chance to play test this one or actually play it with a group of people. So my opinion on it might change a little. There are a couple wording issues that I have that I think cause a little bit of confusion about how things play out.
Okay.
But again, that's something you can, easily just bring up with your group and go, "Hey guys, I don't think this part is perfectly clear."
Right.
And then you guys go, "Oh, okay, I read it like this. Okay, that's how I read it too. Okay, great, we're fine. We can move forward."
Right.
Not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But the thing I really like about China at War, and this is always going to stand out in my mind for me, is as I was reading it, there were aspects of it that made me go, why is this happening? Why is this allowed? Why is this a thing at all? And I actually had to look it up and read about the actual history behind it before I went, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that. That makes perfect sense. And specifically, one of the points is why can the KMT buy military equipment from Germany?
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, I actually looked into why that was, what their deal was, how that progressed, and okay, this makes sense. Now, I will say this: it might be inflated in its possible impact on this game compared to what its possible impact could have been historically. But again, that's true of a lot of historical games. Okay, if you just want to play the exact same war over and over and over again, I don't want to play with you.
That's right.
Okay, I like the idea of looking at a possibility and saying, well, what if that spiraled out of control? What if the KMT did have a runaway game, or what if the CCP had a runaway game historically? And China at War does a lot of that. I like other things. Now, I did a whole video on the China at War.
Yeah, it was a good video. I had to watch it.
And but China at War is just like Spain. One of the things I liked about it the most, I think, is just like Spain is the players who are involved in Spain, Germany, Italy, Russia, possibly the UK and France, depending on the circumstances. Everyone has to make a decision on their level of involvement.
That's
and
right.
How much resources and time they're going to involve. The China at War expansion kind of does the same thing with China. Because now the Allies have a lot more options in giving them money and units and support in various levels with supply tokens and things like this, and they can play it that way, how they want to play it. So now Russia, FEC, ANZAC, the Commonwealth in general, the US, all these nations need to kind of sit down and look at China and go, all right, how do I feel about this? What do I think the best path to victory is? What deals can I make with, and understandings can I come with particularly the FEC player or the Chinese player? It's okay, well, if I get you to this point, I need you to help me over here, kind of a thing. That sort of thing. So all of that is really great interaction between the players.
Yep, I agree.
Now, of course, all of that can lead to some frustration when you've got a player who doesn't want to play like that. No, they're just like, no, I'm the FEC, and I'm just going to worry about what the FEC needs, and China can fend for itself. Okay, well, I mean, that can be a little frustrating for players who
Sure.
are
Yeah,
used
yeah,
to having a lot of
yeah,
interaction with
yeah, yeah,
those other nations and getting some support when
yeah,
it's necessary. But that is a viable way to play as
yeah,
far as the Commonwealth is
yeah,
looking at it. So
yeah.
that's the main reason is it made it a much more interesting, involved scenario
Mm-hmm.
overall.
Mm-hmm. So it seems to be the trend so far is the more it involves people, the higher up it is on our expansion approval rating. Let's say, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that seems to be something to carry on forwards too. If we ever find ourselves creating expansion, that's something to look into. But that's interesting. So two notes I have here. You said how when you started digging into China, where you saw how Germany was sending them weapons and the like. Perhaps designers could, if they wanted to, include the notes on what they used as references, perhaps at the end of the book and the expansion.
And
Maybe.
I will say this: that's a lot of
Oh yeah.
work.
Oh yeah. I
That's a
bet it would be.
lot of work.
I bet it would be. Yeah. Yeah.
So I've got experience with that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's not a good
You're
idea,
probably
just
right. Yeah.
depending on the overall circumstances of what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
you're probably right. Yeah, yeah. Another idea is this idea of deciding on how much to intervene. I think choices are important in a game like this. It's nice when it's just not like an arcade game where it's like, okay, I have this many units, he has this many units, we're going to crash into each other, and I'm going to win, or you're going to win, right? So in this circumstance, it's nice to have like choices, and the more choices you have, it's interesting. Yeah. Okay, that's really good. That's
I
really
will
good.
admit that the third one on my list follows that trend.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, should we go on to my second choice is the
Yes.
Canada at War expansion. Now, I've formed the Canada at War expansion based off of the Spanish Civil War because I thought that was such a good hit with me and my friends. I was like, this is something I want to emulate as much as possible for the Canada at War. And so the idea there is it doesn't only impact Canada and the Allies, because some people might even say it's detrimental to the Allies to have Canada on the board. It impacts Germany, and so they're interested in playing with the expansion because it helps them a little bit, perhaps, but it might also decrease for them. And then Russia is pretty okay with it happening as well because that means that there's going to be a larger focus from the Axis into the Atlantic and the Allies into the Atlantic, which means that Russia will have a bit more of a free hand doing what Russia does. And so it impacts everybody, and everybody is generally happy to play with it for the most part. Everybody gets some bonuses out of it, everybody gets some negatives out of it. And I will admit that it still might need a couple more revisions, maybe one more revision. I'm not too sure about that. What I found in my games is that submarines, I've never had an issue with taking out submarines. Convoy raiding by Germans, I've never had an issue. But you, Wintermute, were saying that in your games you find submarines overpowerful. So in the Canada War, I made submarines a bit more powerful.
I don't know
And
if
so I wonder if that'll cause
overpowerful.
issues.
I don't use the term overpowerful, but the cost versus benefit ratio of them is disproportionately in favor of the submarines at this point.
Right, right, right. So I even
That's
increased
not
that.
completely means it doesn't completely
Yeah,
mean shut
yeah,
them down, but,
yeah, yeah.
but that's just my experience.
I've increased that a little bit further because if you have two submarines raiding on the same convoy line, they each get a +1. One for each other submarine on that same convoy line. So I've made them a little bit more powerful each. So they might need some tweaking. And but other than that, I'm pretty happy with it. I think it offers a lot to the table to all parties essentially. Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
That's a good one.
Yeah. What would your third option be then?
Latin America at war.
Oh, really? Okay. That
Yeah.
takes me back. Yeah.
So Latin America at war for a lot of the same reasons. Now, there was a lot of things that was going on. The rest of the world, Latin America during World War II is forgotten about.
True. Yeah.
And I even years and years ago, I was playing Global 40, and one of my with a guy I was playing it with, who was not as knowledgeable at his point in history, goes, "Man, how come there's nothing going on down here?"
Right. Yeah.
I go, and I kind of walked him through why it was, from what I knew at the time. But he's right. Latin America gets forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But there in some ways there's a lot of politicking going on at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Argentina had this kind of like weird relationship where they hated the British, they preferred the Germans, but at the same point they were stuck with the British, and they needed to fight the Germans. And it was a really weird kind of dynamic there with them. So the Latin America, and then there were countries down there that didn't like each other, and they were on the verge of war. And
well, there's even
some
Ecuador and Colombia, I think it was, had a war in 1938. if memory serves, 39.
I don't remember the exact
Okay, all right.
details, but yeah, you're right. Yeah. And that could have continued. And there were other nations down there that were bickering over stuff.
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
there were some foreign powers who were down there playing around, trying to say, hey, let's it'd be better if we can get America, like Europe, like Germany. If Germany could get America busy down there, maybe that would take some pressure off them. On the other hand, Germany or America was down there playing politics like it does, and actually thought about trying to support Brazil invading Argentina.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah.
There's all real stuff too.
Sure, yeah.
So this expansion takes things. Now, are some of the effects of these events, like once you get the spy network down there, and America has to start shoveling money over to Germany, depending on a die roll every turn, is that maybe a little exaggerated in the impact on the overall? Is it exaggerated within the game, even though historically it wasn't, or may not, or even at its best, it probably wasn't that big of a swing? Probably. But the fact that we're rounding up with that event to make it impactful and make sure that it has an impact on the game, if somebody wants to go that route and somebody wants to really, German player wants to really invest down there to keep America tied up, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing, even though it's a little, it's not exactly historically accurate, but you start with the historical accuracy, then you make it fun and playable. And I think Latin America at War is probably, that's kind of how I look at some of its mechanics. They're fun and playable, even if they're a little overstated.
Right, yeah. But you have to overstate things in these kind of games sometimes, right? Like, just, armies aren't huge compared to what they have on the Eastern Front, so you have to step it up and overstate it just to make things interesting, right? Yeah.
So that's why I like Latin America at War. It just adds another layer of interesting stuff going on in an area of the world that was otherwise forgotten for the most part.
That's interesting. No, I don't know much about it, so I've read through it and I thought it was interesting, but the reports I've heard have been kind of like, well, it's too reliant on dice, and that makes me tend to avoid it a little bit.
And again, I have not had a chance to play it, and I will always throw out the caveat that my opinion on stuff may change.
Oh yeah, for sure.
For anything, for anything that I've talked about, so be it good or bad. So if I ever get a chance to really put some of these expansions through their pace, I may come back and say, okay, yes, there are. I see where the criticism is coming from. I understand it, and here's where I think they should go, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, you're right. So what's your number 3?
My number 3 would be East versus West. I think that one is a really good game because what I find about it, I know it changes the nature of the game quite a bit, and the problem with it as well. Let me tell you about a problem with expansions. If I play War Plan Z as an expansion and I sit down with the play group and say, I want to play War Plan Z, guess what the British player is going to prepare for? He's going to prepare for invasion, or he's going to prepare for a larger German fleet. If I play, oh guys, can we play with Deutsches Afrika Korps? Guess what they're going to do, right? If I play with East versus West, guess what people are going to do? And they're all going to structure their game in a specific direction. So I feel, in some sense, people should be much more open to having expansions and saying, like, let's throw this one on the table, let's throw this one on the table, and throw a whole bunch on there. But they don't necessarily have to play them. I may not choose to play War Plan Z. I may not choose to do, East versus West, just to change things up, right? So that way, people don't know what you're going to do. But it's difficult to do it because the games are so broad. Anyways.
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying. And actually, we're having this discussion right now in a YouTube. We're actually in the preliminary stages of getting a YouTube war set up here.
Nice.
And we're talking about expansions, and a couple of different options came out about how to pick them and whatnot. One that was, well, maybe each player should just pick one expansion.
That's what I was suggesting.
Which is a perfectly reasonable way to do it. But then you might run into that problem, like you just described, where it might actually, unless it's someone like China at War, where it has such a ripple effect through so many variations, so many other aspects of the game, that or Spanish Civil War, same thing, that it might telegraph what you're going to do.
Exactly.
Or maybe not. Like if you're the Russian player and you want to play with elite of Soviet Union,
sure.
Okay, you just want your elite units. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. That's probably not going to change your play style or telegraph the play style.
That's right.
But yeah, so other than that, though, sometimes you're right. Though it's like I really want to play with this. It's like, well, if that player really wants to play with that, he's probably planning on going that route, or he's faking me out, which is more likely.
Yeah.
He's probably not faking me out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But then again, but you're right though. Maybe you do get into a group where you just play with the same 5, 4, 5, 6 expansions all the time. And your group gets to the point where the meta cannot predict what you're going to do because you just play with it all the time. And sometimes you completely ignore it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Either that or dive into each expansion and pair them up with something else and say, this one pairs with this one, or try to make, like, say, if you're playing with the German operational plans, say if you play this one, then you have to play with a certain Allied operational plans as well as Soviet operational plans. Something like that, just to kind of get that holistic approach that we like about the Spanish Civil War, where it ripple effects to everybody. So maybe that's the way things should be redesigned. I don't know. That's just a thought.
and you and me had talked about going through and doing some ratings for the various expansions. Like, okay, if you want to play Elite of the Soviet Union, okay, and then you want to scale that on a rating from 1 to 10 as to how it benefits.
That's right. Yeah.
All the nations involved in that expansion, and let's say that one would be it only solely benefits Russia. So that's an easy one that we only need to judge Russia. But then on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does it skew things towards Russia? And I don't know. I haven't thought this, but let's say that's a 5. Let's just say it's a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10. But then you look at China at war. Well, that one's a lot harder. Yeah. Because now, and the reason we would rate them is because this way maybe players have some idea, if they've never played an expansion, they're not very familiar with it, about, if you've got a 5 in Russia with that one, then maybe the German player wants to take a lead of the Reich. Yeah. And that one's listed as roughly a 5 for Germany. So you guys would more or less be even up in that sense. And then you would just need to kind of think about the other nations, as opposed to some which may greatly advantage one nation, German war plans. I mean, a scale of 1 to 10, that one's probably a 15.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, that one is really huge. Really huge. Yeah. But on the other hand, you've got ones like China at War, which, well, let's see. China, KMT, and CCP both have advantages that come out of that expansion. Russia gets more options out of the expansion, not as huge, so they would maybe only be a 1 or a 2. FEC gets some expansions, or some advantages, or some usable things in that expansion. They may actually, and they get more options than the Russia player does, actually.
Yeah, okay.
So maybe they're a 3. But then what about ANZAC? Because how do things affect ANZAC? America, I mean, the allies in general can all benefit from a lot of the rules in there. But, the general idea is to kind of just put kind of a quick and dirty rating system that will help you kind of balance things out in your head, especially if you're not already kind of familiar with them.
So especially if people are, like if you're a newbie showing up and be like, well, I don't know which one to play, but I want to play with something, and you'll look at the Wintermute and Jinx's rating system for expansions and be like, okay, this one is +3 for the Axis, +2 for the Allies, and +3 for the Comintern, or whatever, however you do it, right? Yeah, that would be a way of doing things. It would be complex, but it would be something doable. And you could even do the basket of units type expansions too. It's like, well, this is a +2 for the Elite of the Reich, it's a +2 for the Axis, and 0 for everybody else, or something like that.
Yeah, and that's how I would probably list it.
Yeah, and then you can do it simply like, so I don't play Warhammer or anything like that, but you know how you have a certain amount of points to build your army? So that's another way of doing things, is say every player shows up to the board with, say, 20 points, and you could, or Italy maybe 10 points, and everybody can choose how they want to spend those points.
No, actually, that's not a terrible, that's actually a better analogy than it ended up being, because Games Workshop is on my shit list, and they have been for a long time.
Right. Yeah.
But no, but you're right though. Essentially, you're right. Axis get X number of points to pick, allies get X number, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So we had talked about what the possibility of, we had a short list of honorable mention.
Before we get into that, I'll quickly cover some of the points of East and West, sorry, if that's all right with you. So the whole concept behind that is it extends the game a little bit further. So you could do different things. You could have a truce between Germany and USSR, or a truce between Germany and the Allies, and or everything like that, or Axis the Axis alliance can split as well. So you have different things that can happen. It changes the nature of the game. So say if it looks like the Russians are absolutely dominating, if you have this expansion in play each and every game, you could be like, all right, guys, we need to change things up. We need to restructure this game so we have a chance of winning. And you could have like this second stage in the game that just flips around, where suddenly it's a new alliance is formed, and you have kind of the Axis and Allies alliance versus the Comintern, and that just changes it to this different stage. So in some sense, it kind of is not so, it's not ideal too, because I think I'm winning, and then everybody gangs up on you. But in the same sense, it really makes the game a little bit more interesting and drags it out a bit more, because there is that possibility that you're going to be backstabbed. Because as it currently stands, if I remember correctly, the Comintern can't go to war against the Allies until Berlin has fallen. Maybe I'm wrong on this one. I think it has changed.
I'd have to look it up. It's never come up in a game, so it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the Allies can't declare war against the Comintern until Berlin has fallen, or something like that. So your hands are effectively tied. So if the USSR is winning and collecting a lot of points, like, well, I'm screwed anyways, I can't do anything about it. And then you can actually talk to your Axis player and say, let's strike a deal and make this happen so one of us has a chance of winning.
Real quick question. Is one of those scenarios one that is like post-World War II, where Russia is going to fight against what would effectively become NATO, but like just a couple years after the war?
I think...
I thought that one was in there, and that one was the one that intrigued me the most. And maybe I'm wrong, because I know they have a separate roundel set.
Right.
That made me think of that.
Right, yeah. Well, let's see. There's one Operation Unthinkable, Operation Pluto. There's Truce between Germany and USSR, Truce between Germany and Western Allies, Truce between Japan and the Western Allies, and Axis alliances split. So I suppose the one that would be most applicable would be probably the last one, Axis alliances split, because that means that maybe... No.
Like I said, I haven't had a chance to really read the rules. Yeah. But I found that to be a really interesting and intriguing kind of expansion that makes me want to play it just by concept alone.
Yeah. Looking at it and from memory of it, so I haven't played it either, just because I haven't played too much lately, and with expansions, this is not one that's very high up on people's lists. So looking at it, it's all within the constraints of World War II, and it doesn't really go beyond 1947. If memory serves, there's only one scenario that would allow you to extend the game to 1947.
Okay.
So everything ends then, yeah. Okay, so you were going to say that we are looking at the honorable mentions list.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So a couple honorable mentions that I have is special operations, because I really like the idea of the commandos behind enemy lines. There's a lot of movies that I grew up watching that were based on that. Even before I was into World War II, I like those movies. So I think the rules are a little heavy, sometimes they're a little unwieldy, but conceptually, I absolutely love it and would play with that one if I got people who wanted to play with it. But I also think that one favors the Allies more. So I would definitely take that into consideration. Another one that I do like Elite of the Soviet Union. I like Elite of the Reich. I was less impressed with Elite of the Rising Sun. It just didn't do it for me.
Right.
Other than that, I do own the Partisan set.
Okay.
Though, and I would play it, though, to be quite honest, the rules are a bit heavy and slow in terms of having to roll for each territory individually.
That's true.
I would probably modify that to a house rule. Now, again, if I'm playing over a long period of time, over 2 months, 4, 5, 6 hours every Sunday, that may not be as big a deal. But short of that, I do not want to pick up, okay, I'm going to roll for this territory. I'm going to roll for that territory. I'm going to roll for that territory. I'm going to roll for that territory. I have a different idea of how I do it, but that's the thing. That's the only real hesitation I have is that just gets a little bogged down.
Well, that's right.
But I do love the concept for the same reason I like the Commando one. I like the idea of partisans, about citizen soldiers who were not volunteers in the army. They just picked up a rifle and fought because they knew they had to. Yeah. So yeah, those are the ones that come to mind right off the top of my head that I own. I like. There aren't, because I do have some that I own that I just haven't had a chance to play, or I own, but I'm hesitant with certain groups, or it's a time constraint. But they're still good expansions. I just don't have the time for them. They just haven't made it to the table yet.
No, that's right. Yeah. No, that's good. So I'm going to go over 5 of mine that I quite enjoy, if that's cool. So, Turkey at war. And again, this goes to what we were talking about before. I honestly not crazy about have Turkey involved with anybody, but the way I see it is Turkey should be the hub upon which upon the wheel of which World War II would spin, essentially, right? So you have, movements going towards the east and movements from on the bottom side going the opposite direction, more or less, right? So that's my perspective with Turkey at war. But I do like the fact that everybody can interact together against that single territory. Unfortunately, it has a hang-up of reliant on dice rolls, which I'm not crazy about. And that's the same reason, like Turkey at war or diplomacy, I like them both, but they fall short just because of that feature behind it.
You like diplomacy?
I like diplomacy.
I think we're done here.
I don't like the way the diplomacy works, but I like the concept of bringing anybody into the war. That's what I like about it. I don't like the fact that you roll dice to impact everybody, but I like some of the features behind it. Yeah. Okay, let's go on before you hate me too much. So then I have War Plan Z. I like the concept of especially with Germany, where you kind of set yourself up with a goal and a plan, and now you have to fulfill that plan. It really reminds me of like the authoritarian kind of dictatorship that it was. It's like, this is what we're doing. Too bad, guys. We're going for this. I don't care if it's not beneficial to us anymore. We're doing it because we made these political promises to the people. I like that for its immersion quality, oddly enough.
Yeah, and that's a fair restraint to put on somebody. Okay, you're getting this bonus, but you have to do this, otherwise, or whatever. I haven't read those rules in a while, so I don't remember the details. But I think it's a fair restriction to put on somebody.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah. Next one up, I have the Fall of the Reich, and that one's fun. But unfortunately, it's broken in the system that it has, because you have to spend 15 IPPs so that when Berlin falls, you can reestablish your capital in Buenos Aires. But it's like, if you have $15 to spare, I'm going to buy 5 infantry to defend Berlin, as opposed to, and also it sets up too, it really like reveals to your opponent what you're planning on doing. So it really makes me wonder too, is like perhaps expansions should be something that you can pull out, or certain expansions, they're all available. You can just pull them out at different times during the game if you want to. Maybe. I don't know. So I like the concept of that.
I know what you're saying though, where you get to a point where you can pull the pin, and if that player goes and pulls that pin, then you introduce this kind of like obscure expansion.
It has to be implemented by this date or not at all, kind of thing.
Yeah. And you know what? That's actually not a terrible idea to maybe have an expansion with concepts like that, like 5 mini scenarios where
that's right.
This nation had this opportunity by this date, and if by this date you have had to make this decision, and X, Y, and Z need to be met, and then this kind of triggers a couple of events, and it can be a little more each one can be a little more self-contained. But actually, I kind of like that concept, and maybe maybe that's something somebody can explore in an expansion.
I think it's cool too, because it makes Germany step aside and be like, okay, guys, you win in Europe. I'm moving to Argentina. So hopefully you guys fight it out here now for the victory point, because I'm all out of the picture now, and maybe I'll have a surprise comeback, but maybe not, right? That's what I like about it. It's got this cool. Probably not. Yeah.
I wouldn't get your hopes up on that one.
No. Unless you boost up the income of Argentina by double. Okay, next one up, I have Commanders of World War II. I like it, but it's broken in its way as far as I'm concerned. Because it just does a set amount of stuff. It's like +1 for defense, +1 for attack. So it becomes just a moving dice modifier, and that's it.
They do say in the rules that they do have a sequel to that planned, and I don't know when and if it will have happened, but they do talk about it. Where it sounds like they're going to have actual named generals with specific abilities to that general, and I do love that concept.
Me too.
I actually want to make kind of like they have those warlord token pictures, or picture tokens you can buy now. I want one. I want a set of that for the generals, and then if it's Patton, he gets this bonus.
That's right.
If it's Rommel, he gets this kind of bonus. And I like that idea a lot more than I like the basic commander set.
Me too.
And the basic commander set is okay for one, except for one rule, and that's that there's no upper limit to the bonus that they can give.
That's right. Yeah.
I hate that.
I hate that for sure. And it's absolutely deadly too. As if you're the attacker, it's all in your hands too. It's like, well, now I'm going to move this here with this army, and it's +1 for everybody. So that means your anti-aircraft is rolling at 3 dice at 4. Everything is just way out of the roof, and it's cumulative as well. So if you're on defense for that matter, if you're on defense, it's like +2 from the fortification and +1 for the commander. So it's like your militia are rolling at almost tank levels at that point. So it's got many different hang-ups, and it should be much more limited. But I like the concept because World War I and World War II, a lot of it's about personality. That's why you like the special operations, the personality of the commandos and the different characteristics that they brought to the table. And so likewise in World War II, these commanders, Rommel, he has 3 rerolls for tanks, or let's say, and maybe Patton does something similar, and Montgomery might do, they can support 2 units for artillery instead of just 1, or something like that, right? Or artillery can support all units.
That's what I would like to see, something a little more narrower, focused. And as the guy who owns the general, you go, okay, do I really think this guy would be better over here in this theater this theater? And I want to have to make those decisions as a player.
And it's not just broadly +1 for everybody. It's more specific where it's not that obvious of a big bonus. So that's my 4th one, and I'll just tell you my 5th one would be Partisans for the same reasons you mentioned. And I think Partisans, because what could happen is if you're a nation and you start capturing territory, you become like this rolling snowball that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you don't have to defend too much of your interior areas. If you have partisans popping up there, yes, you've rolled up bigger, but bits are breaking off all the time, and it becomes like this stressful situation. And so there's one tweak I could think of that would solve it to some degree. Say that you either have each territory has a different number on it, or even a color on it. Say, Romania, Latvia, and Western Russia will have like a yellow token on it, and that you roll a 12-sided dice, it'll have different colors on it, and if it's yellow, each turn you roll it, so whatever territories have the yellow token on it get a partisan, and then you have 1 dice roll each round to represent the partisans that will spring up.
My solution is actually simpler. I'm not going to go into it right now.
All right.
That's another video. Yeah. But I think we both kind of have that same kind of hang up where it's just a lot of die rolling, and you're only looking for like a 12 most of the time.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, partisans aren't that good.
No, that's right.
I really want to roll them for every territory that I've conquered every single turn. It's like, oh my god. So anyway,
That's right, Okay, so I think we covered all our honorable mentions plus our top expansions. So if anybody has any challenges to what we put in here, or even suggest your own top expansions that you guys like in the comments, that would be fantastic. We really don't mind, and we like interacting with you, the viewers, as well too. It's always fun and enjoyable. So please subscribe to the channel, like the channel, subscribe to Wintermute's channel too, because next week hopefully we're going to be putting a video out on his channel, and we're not quite sure what that video will be, but it will be a gooder. And that's about it, folks. So awesome. I will talk to you later, Wintermute.
Later.
Cheers.